Welcome to the Dream Novel channel. Before starting to listen to the fun in this clip, don't forget to like and comment, so that the admin will have the encouragement to continue making clips. Let's go listen. Channel Dream Novel. Chapter 101, Memories and Letters. The common room was quiet and dark. It seemed Conna and Cedric's detention wasn't over yet. Kyle didn't bother turning on the lights. Instead, he sank into one of the sofas, mulling over the night's events. So much had happened, and he needed to piece it all together. Firstly, he was certain that the figure they'd seen during the nighttime walk was Hagrid. There was no way it could have been someone else disguised as him. Even if someone could look like Hagrid using a polyjuice potion, Fong, who had been by his side, couldn't have been an animagus, and polyjuice potion didn't work on animals. But if that really had been Hagrid, why did he insist he hadn't been in the Forbidden Forest? And then there was Dumbledore's cryptic remark. Memory, a memory charm? Kyle considered. Or maybe, the venom of the swooping evil. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small piece of wood with signs of corrosion, and rubbed it thoughtfully between his fingers. He'd secretly cut it from the tree trunk earlier when Hagrid wasn't looking. In the moonlight streaming through the window, the wood emitted a faint blue glow. The color seemed right, but Kyle recalled that swooping evil venom wasn't known to be corrosive. Or am I remembering it wrong? Just then, the door to the common room opened, and two figures entered quietly. Kyle, I knew you'd be here, Cedric said in a low voice. Filch left on some errand earlier and came back furious. He must have been looking for you. Kyle tucked away the wooden block and nodded. I ran into him on the way back. What did you do to make him so mad? Cedric asked, intrigued. It wasn't me, it was Hagrid, Kyle said, holding back a laugh. Filch ended up getting a bit roughed up by him. No wonder he was fuming. Cedric grinned. I remember Filch and Hagrid have never been on good terms. Then he asked, by the way, what was your detention? I thought for sure we'd be back first. Fred said cleaning the trophy room was a breeze compared to anything we've done before. Filch agreed, until he made us do it 3 times over before he finally let us go. Same here, sort of, Kyle replied. I was taken to the Forbidden Forest. Hagrid and I went in to search for something. The Forbidden Forest? At night? Cedric looked stunned. He'd considered plenty of possibilities, copying lines, scrubbing classrooms, polishing armor, but it hadn't crossed his mind that Kyle's detention would take him to the Forbidden Forest. That was on a completely different level. They had only ventured into the forest once at night and had barely crossed the outer edge. There hadn't been any real danger. But going in to search for something with Hagrid? That wasn't just a stroll in the woods. Were you hurt? Conna asked, her voice filled with concern. Of course not. If I had been, I'd be in the infirmary now, Kyle assured her, grinning. Actually, I even saw a centaur while we were there. Kyle recounted his experience in the Forbidden Forest. Cedric and Conna listened in rapt attention, their expressions shifting from initial worry to outright envy. They, too, wanted to see the depths of the Forbidden Forest for themselves. As dawn crept closer, the three of them finally grew drowsy and stopped talking. Kyle returned to his dormitory, but despite his tiredness, he couldn't fall asleep. Sitting up, he took out a piece of parchment and a quill and began writing a letter by the light of the moon. When he'd finished, he sealed the letter, addressed it, and placed it in front of Ratton, his trusty messenger. I'll need your help with this one, Kyle whispered. Deliver this letter to Newt first thing in the morning. If he hasn't returned yet, leave it at the entrance to the largest tree. There's a bowtruckle there, it'll look after it. Kyle had decided to reach out to Newt, just in case. If swooping evil venom really was corrosive, it might be due to a magical mutation. He wasn't sure if Newt had returned yet, but it was worth a try. If Newt was back, great, if not, Kyle knew Dumbledore would handle things from here. Ratton opened one eye, placed a paw on the envelope, and gave a faint nod. With that settled, Kyle lay back on his bed, and this time, sleep came easily. After that, neither Dumbledore nor Hagrid reached out to Kyle again, and he was content to be left to his own devices. Resisting the urge to delve into the mysteries of the Forbidden Forest, he focused on preparing for the final exams instead. As exam week approached, the castle seemed to transform overnight. Everywhere he looked, younger students were walking around practicing wand movements, their spells muttered under their breath. This was also one of the most hazardous times of year at Hogwarts, as countless students subconsciously chanted incantations while gesturing with their wands. Kyle had barely made it from the common room to the Great Hall before witnessing two unfortunate students accidentally hit by stray charms. Luckily, the mishaps only required a quick levitation charm or mending charm, so no one needed a trip to the hospital wing this time. Kyle navigated cautiously, dodging the spell-slinging assassins, hiding among the bustling crowd, and finally made it to the Great Hall without incident. The professors, too, were well aware of the chaos, as every class seemed to have 2 or 3 students absent due to spells gone wrong, most of them directed straight to the hospital wing. In Transfiguration, Professor McGonagall addressed the issue sternly. "Where were your wands this morning?" she asked, her lips pressed thin. "From now on, if you must practice, find an empty classroom. Anyone caught improperly handling their wand will receive a week's detention." Professor Snape, in his usual no-nonsense style, was even more severe. He announced in Potions class that if any student missed his class due to injuries from spell accidents, they would fail, whether they were absent or had been the cause of the mishap. There would be no exceptions. Kyle couldn't shake the feeling that Snape had cast a pointed look his way as he said it. Thanks to these strict warnings, the castle assassins all but vanished within half a day. By dinner time, Hogwarts had returned to its usual calm, as if nothing had ever happened. At dinner, Kyle cut his steak distractedly. His mind wasn't on Snape or spell accidents but on Ratton. 5 days had passed since he'd sent his letter, yet Ratton hadn't returned. 5 days. That was more than enough time for several round trips from Dorset to Hogwarts, even if Ratton had traveled by train. Channel Dream Novel. Chapter 102, Final Exams. A few days before exams, Ratton finally returned to Hogwarts. When Kyle returned to the common room after dinner, he saw his owl perched on the windowsill. Ratton looked exhausted, its eyes drooping, its body visibly thinner, and its once lustrous feathers dull and gray. Upon spotting Kyle, Ratton lifted its head and attempted to fly over to him, flapping its wings weakly. But midway, its strength gave out, and it began to fall. Kyle quickly stepped forward, catching it just in time. "I recognize this owl," Cedric said, glancing at Ratton, who had promptly fallen asleep in Kyle's arms. "Why does it look so worn out? Has it been delivering letters non-stop?" "Just one, but I think he misunderstood my instructions." Kyle gently placed Ratton on the sofa beside him and removed an envelope from its talons. It was a reply, and the handwriting on the envelope was Newt's. Apparently, Ratton hadn't returned to Dorset after delivering the letter but had flown directly to Newt and then come all the way back. No wonder it had taken so long to return. Kyle shook his head, amused and exasperated. That silly bird. With exams starting the next day, the young wizards went to bed early, hoping to be well rested. Kyle sat beside Ratton, rubbing its neck feathers softly before opening Newt's letter. The reply was brief. "Kyle, I was surprised to receive your letter from such a distance. I've thought over what you mentioned. The venom of the swooping evil isn't corrosive, it only affects the brain and doesn't impact plants. However, I examined the wood you sent. It indeed contains components of swooping evil venom. This is an important discovery. Once I finish my work here, I'll come to Hogwarts immediately. P.S. Your father asked me to remind you to avoid any danger and leave the matter to Dumbledore." Newt Scamander. After reading the letter, Kyle closed his eyes, thinking quietly. The pieces finally started to fit together. Hagrid hadn't gone to the Forbidden Forest that night because he'd spotted them during a nighttime walk, but because he'd been drawn there by someone, or something, else. Likely, he had encountered that person deep in the forest, leading to a struggle and the two messy rows of footprints by the tree. But the opponent must have had a swooping evil. Its venom had likely affected Hagrid, causing him to forget the entire encounter. This would explain why he didn't show up with the Christmas tree at the assembly hall on Christmas Day. He believed it was still autumn. Everything made sense now. And that swooping evil was likely the one the Ministry of Magic had been searching for. The only mystery left was who had poisoned Hagrid. Could it have been one of the hooded wizards at the Hog's Head pub? Or perhaps someone hiding in the castle? Half an hour later, Kyle gave up his musings. Sometimes, mysteries could only be solved by letting them go. As Newt's letter reminded him, Dumbledore was already involved. Kyle could let this matter rest and focus on enjoying his holiday soon enough. With that comforting thought, he picked up Rattan and headed back to the dormitory. The next day, exams began. The first one was the Magical Theory exam, also known as the written exam. To prevent cheating, students were forbidden from bringing their own quills and ink, instead using school-provided stationery. But this didn't stop some young wizards from trying their luck. Katie Bell from Gryffindor entered the exam room nervously. Shortly after sitting down, Professor McGonagall strode over, reached out, and pulled off the large red hair accessory Katie was wearing. "Miss Bell," she said coldly, "that's not how transfiguration works." The hair accessory squirmed in McGonagall's hands, transforming into a piece of parchment covered with tiny writing. Kyle, watching this unfold, gave Katie a discreet thumbs up. Cheating with transfiguration in front of Professor McGonagall? That took a level of courage fitting of Gryffindor House. Other students with cheat sheets written on their clothing didn't escape her scrutiny either. As McGonagall patrolled the classroom, she seemed to have an instinct for finding guilty expressions, deftly pulling each cheater out of their seats. A seasoned professor and deputy headmistress at Hogwarts for over 3 decades, McGonagall needed no magical aids to spot nervous students. As students began answering questions, McGonagall muttered that Dumbledore really shouldn't have put her in charge of the first-year exam room. It simply wasn't challenging enough. She would have preferred supervising 5th years and above, where the cheating techniques were far more sophisticated. With older students, professors had to contend with creative tactics like potions, enchanted objects, coded hand signals, and subtle charms. Particularly in potions, items like Baruffio's Brain Elixir and Waking Potion were common, with whispers of students attempting to sneak in Felix Felici's for any WTS. There were even instances of attempted Polyjuice potions and disillusionment charms, turning exam supervision into a war without smoke for the professors. For most, it was a nuisance, but McGonagall thrived on the challenge of outwitting students. Unfortunately, this year she'd been assigned to supervise the novice village, as she put it, a simple group of first years. An hour into the exam, she glanced at the dutiful students and sighed, "Really, Albus, why assign me to the first years? Even third years would be a step up." After the written test came the practical exam. Professor Flitwick had each student attempt to make a pineapple ride, a makeshift broomstick, just a wooden rod with a feather attached, for a lap around the room. This task was no issue for Kyle. Not only did he complete the assignment flawlessly, but he even managed to make the pineapple execute a classic Quidditch trick, which earned him an immediate perfect score from Professor Flitwick. Next up, Professor McGonagall tested their transfiguration skills by asking each student to transform a rabbit into a brooch. The more detailed the brooch, the higher the score, with deductions if the brooch retained any rabbit-like features. Kyle, recalling a brooch he'd received as a Christmas gift from Mikkel, created an exact replica, and McGonagall awarded him a perfect score. Finally, the potions exam required students to brew a simple boil-cure potion. Kyle carefully followed each step, resulting in a flawless potion. Yet he wasn't optimistic about his score. Throughout the entire exam, Professor Snape loomed over him, watching intently and shaking his head with apparent disapproval. Kyle could already imagine Snape deducting points wherever possible, just for the sake of it. Channel Dream Novel. Chapter 103, Hagrid and Professor Orin. The last exam, history of magic, was easily the dullest hour of the day. Kyle only needed 20 minutes to scribble out the Werewolf Code of Conduct from 1637 and the life story of Uric the Oddball. When Professor Binza's ghost finally announced they could put down their quills, the entire class erupted in cheers. Exams were over, and now they had a whole week to relax until the results were announced. "That was way easier than I expected," Mikkel said confidently as they stepped outside into the bright sunlight. "I saw something about Uric the Oddball the other day, and I'm positive he graduated from Gryffindor, so there's no way I got that one wrong." "Gryffindor?" Ryan muttered absently, then frowned. "Isn't that Slytherin?" "What a shame," Mikkel sighed. "It was definitely Gryffindor." "Oh, Merlin's beard." Ryan groaned, clutching his hair. "If only I hadn't wasted time memorizing that wizard who invented the self-stirring cauldron." Mikkel patted his shoulder consolingly. "Don't worry, it's just one small mistake, it won't cost too many points." Kyle, amused by their exchange, decided to join in. Slipping over, he whispered to them, "Actually, Uric the Oddball graduated from Ravenclaw." Michael's face went blank with shock. "It's true," Kyle said, grinning. "It's in the third line of Chapter 2. Or you could ask one of the Ravenclaws. They're bound to remember." Incredulous, Mikkel turned and approached a nearby group of Ravenclaws to check. A minute later, he was back, crouched next to Ryan, holding his head in dismay. "Don't worry," Kyle said, patting his shoulder with a smirk. "It's just one house mix-up, won't cost too many points." After bidding farewell to his crestfallen friends, Kyle wandered down to the lake. In the warm shallows lay the giant squid, basking in the sunlight while Fred and George Weasley gently flicked its tentacles. Kyle couldn't help but imagine how delicious it might be grilled with cumin and paprika. Plop. Nope. Better not think about that. Shaking his head, he turned his gaze away. Not far off, he spotted Kanna sitting under a tree, her arms around her knees, watching Pocky, her pet, sunbathing on the grass. She seemed downcast, lacking the usual post-exam relief. "What's wrong?" Kyle asked, walking over. "Did the exam not go well?" Kanna snapped out of her daze, shaking her head. She stroked Pocky's tail and murmured, "Are exams really over? Does that mean the term's over, too?" "7 days," Kyle replied, sitting beside her. "We get our results in a week, and then we're off for the summer. By September, we'll be in second year." "7 days," she repeated softly. At that moment, Fred and George strolled over, catching sight of Kanna's somber expression. Fred grinned and said, "Come on, cheer up. We don't even know our scores yet, so no need to stress." "Exactly," George added. "It's the best time of the year, no exams, no homework, no classes. What could be better?" Kanna finally smiled, her mood lifting. "You're right." The twins then mentioned they were planning to sneak off to Hogsmeade through a secret passage. With their newfound wealth of 100 galleons, they had big plans for the day, a shopping spree for Honeyduke sweets, butterbeer from the Three Broomsticks, and, most importantly, a stash of enchanted joke items from Zonko's joke shop. "We're planning to go through the secret passage behind the mirror on the 4th floor," Fred said with a mischievous grin. "I guarantee Filch has no clue about it. Want to come with us?" George added, looking between Kyle and Kanna. Kyle nodded, about to agree, when an owl swooped down, delivering a note. He unfolded it and read, "Dear Kyle, I know you finished your exams. Could you come over to my place? Fluffy seems to be sick lately." Hagrid, Kyle's expression shifted with concern. "Sorry, I need to go see Hagrid. He says Fluffy isn't feeling well." "All right," Fred replied. "Want us to bring you back anything?" "Honeyduke sweets, the good stuff," Kyle said with a grin. "Good call," the twins chuckled as they headed off toward their adventure. Kyle turned to Kanna. "Not joining them?" Kanna shook her head. I don't really need anything from Hogsmeade. It's nice here, soaking up the sun with Pocky. Sunbathing can wait, Kyle said, glancing at her pet rat, Pocky. Want to come with me to Hagrid's? Fluffy's sick, and we could go check on him. Kanna's eyes brightened. Can I? Sure. Since she'd met Fluffy before, Kyle saw no problem bringing her along. As he started down the grassy slope, Kanna quickly tucked Pocky into her pocket and hurried after him. Crossing the field, they arrived in front of Hagrid's hut, only to find someone already there. Professor Oren? Kyle asked in surprise, seeing him standing by Hagrid's door. Are you here to see Hagrid too? In a way, Professor Oren replied with a smile. Actually, I was waiting for you too. Hagrid wrote to me, mentioning Fluffy's illness and asking if I knew any treatments for magical creatures. So here I am. You know about Fluffy? Kyle asked, intrigued. Yes, Hagrid told me about the three-headed dog when we were having drinks one night. Nearly scared me out of my wits, didn't think he'd actually keep such a dangerous creature here. Kyle nodded, thinking typical Hagrid, he can't keep a secret after a drink or two. Is Hagrid inside? Kyle glanced toward the hut, which appeared empty. Oh. I almost forgot, Professor Oren said, smacking his forehead. Hagrid was worried, so I suggested he go ahead to the Forbidden Forest to check on Fluffy while I waited here for you too. Come along, then. I'll take you to him now. Channel Dream Novel. Chapter 104, Not a Chapter. Channel Dream Novel. Chapter 105, Animagus. I'm sorry, Professor Oren, Kyle said, standing his ground. First years aren't allowed in the Forbidden Forest. I think we'd better go back to the castle. It's good to follow the rules, Professor Oren replied with a calm smile, but sometimes, you don't need to be overly disciplined, Kyle. That can make you miss out on a lot of interesting things. That's not possible, Kyle insisted. If Professor McGonagall finds out, we'll be expelled. It's not as serious as that. Minerva was only trying to scare you. Besides, I'm right here, aren't I? Professor Oren said, placing one hand on his hip and gesturing toward the forest with the other. As the Hogwarts Professor of Defense Against the Dark Arts, I'm allowing you to join me in the Forbidden Forest today. Think of it as an educational experience. Kyle's heart sank, but he tried to keep his face neutral. No need to guess anymore, he thought. Professor Oren must be the person with the swooping evil. It explained a lot. If Oren didn't have a hidden agenda, why else would he take up a teaching post at Hogwarts? Kyle had had his suspicions for months, ever since he'd first read about the incident in the newspaper. He'd even asked Professor McGonagall indirectly about Oren's arrival. She'd told him Oren took the post in July, while the smuggling group had entered the country in late August, giving Oren a solid alibi. How had he pulled it off? Kyle wondered. But he held his tongue. Oren's hand, resting on his wand, was poised to draw it in a heartbeat, a subtle threat that made Kyle sure he was dealing with the mysterious person behind Hagrid's memory loss. Fine, Kyle said, shrugging as casually as he could. If the professor allows it, then I suppose it's all right. A wise choice, Professor Oren said, one eyebrow arched approvingly. Kyle took a few steps forward, then paused as if suddenly remembering something. Turning to Kanna, he said, "Oh, I just realized, I forgot to bring the jerky for Fluffy. Could you go grab it for me? It's on the common room table, right by the door." Okay, Kanna replied, giving him a curious look. She didn't seem to find his request too odd and turned back toward the castle. Professor Oren didn't seem concerned. It was clear that his target had always been Kyle, and he made no attempt to stop Kanna. Kyle felt a small measure of relief, at least she would be safe. But at that very moment, an unexpected accident happened. The rat, Pocky, suddenly leaped out of Kanna's pocket and bolted toward the Forbidden Forest at top speed. "Pocky, come back!" Kanna cried, instinctively chasing after her pet. The incident happened so quickly that Kyle couldn't stop her. In mere moments, Kanna had followed Pocky straight into the depths of the forbidden forest. Kyle's eye twitched, but it was too late to argue now. Kanna was already deep in the forbidden forest, so he had no choice but to go after her to prevent any accidents. The forest was thick with trees, making it nearly impossible to track a small creature like a mouse. Soon, Pocky disappeared from sight, and Kyle caught up to Kanna, grabbing her to stop her from running further. "Go back to the castle," he said urgently. "But Pocky, there's no time to worry about him now. Just get back to the castle." Kyle began to pull her along, intending to leave, but then he noticed Professor Oren standing just behind them. "I must say, Kyle, it's quite rude to handle a young witch so unkindly," Professor Oren remarked with a bland smile. "Let's all help Miss Prince find her pet, shall we?" Kyle tensed, and as he was about to protest, Professor Oren stepped closer, bending down and adding lightly, "We shouldn't waste time. That's a magical mouse, after all, losing it would be a shame." From Kyle's angle, he could see that Oren's wand was subtly trained on Kanna. He clenched his jaw, forcing himself to stay calm. "You're right," he said, exhaling and managing a dry smile. "We'll do as you say." "Good boy," Professor Oren said with a faint smirk. He led the three of them further into the depths of the forbidden forest, glancing around as if genuinely searching for Pocky. Along the way, Oren even drove off a few aggressive creatures and spiders that crossed their path, playing his role as protector to perfection. Kyle followed, increasingly certain that this was no ordinary stroll. After a long walk, Professor Oren broke the silence. "Kyle, Minerva mentioned you're quite skilled in transfiguration. Have you considered becoming an animagus?" "No, Professor," Kyle replied, keeping his tone even. Animagus is an advanced form of transfiguration. It requires extensive knowledge, as well as precise magical control. I'm still a long way from that. "Oh," Professor Oren said, removing a fallen tree from their path with a flick of his wand. "You seem quite well informed about animagus. Professor McGonagall demonstrated it during our first lesson. I found it fascinating, so I looked it up in the library," Kyle explained. "Yes, it's truly a remarkable magic, transforming oneself into an animal," Oren murmured, almost to himself. "Many wizards who operate in the shadows dream of mastering it. Animagus can make things very convenient when certain tasks arise. After all, who would suspect a cat, an insect, or a mouse? That's why the ministry requires animagi to register under their real names." He paused, looking at Kyle with a knowing gleam. "Of course, if you do pursue to become an animagus one day, I wouldn't suggest registering." At that moment, Professor Oren's voice sounded more like that of a teacher sharing personal wisdom than an instructor imparting a lesson. Kyle narrowed his eyes. "Professor, isn't it a bit early for this advice?" he said, his tone calm but wary. "I've only just started learning transfiguration, so at this rate, I wouldn't even consider becoming an animagus until 5th year." "No, I think you'll be ready by next year," Oren replied, giving him a sidelong glance. "Talent is hard to hide, Kyle. Especially for a young wizard like yourself with very distinctive abilities. You may not realize it, but while you're an average student in my class, I've noticed your magical control is highly precise, with a rare level of stability." He continued smoothly, "To put it another way, if the charms of other young witches and wizards are like cotton thread, yours are more like steel wire. Even if you limit your magic, it's just thinner steel, but steel all the same. Cotton and steel, you see, those aren't hard for the trained eye to distinguish." Professor Oren chuckled lightly, watching Kyle's reaction. "Perhaps you didn't realize, but we professors have actually mentioned you quite a few times in private. We've all shared stories of your underwhelming classroom performance and, well, even made bets on how long you could keep it up." Kyle felt as though he'd been struck by lightning. A powerful wave of embarrassment washed over him. So much for keeping a low profile. Everyone had their own predictions, Oren went on, smirking. Apart from Professor Aurora, who opted out, Minerva and Phileas thought you'd reveal yourself by 3rd year, Pomona placed her bets on 5th, and Severus, well, let's just say he left it open-ended, possibly even 7th year. Kyle felt his cheeks heat up in silent humiliation. He'd genuinely thought he'd hidden his abilities well. Now the fun in this clip is over. Which listeners haven't liked and commented yet? You can press like and comment to encourage the admin find the fun in the next clip. May the listeners be happy forever.